Welcome to Cameron Academy and your basic math skills along with the ABC formula. The great news about this real estate math you're going to encounter on your exams, it's practical math. We're not sending people to the moon. It's math you can actually digest and apply in your real estate careers. However, we have to know some simple conversions, which we'll see in just a moment, and the basic ABC formula, which is the hardest your math could possibly get. But let me give you some advice before we actually get started. The last 10 questions on your exams are typically going to be math. This means the first 90 questions will be principles, practices, law, ethics, procedures, and so forth. So as a study tip in preparation for your examinations, you study to the point where you have to put all of your belongings away. You set them to the side, and as soon as you sit down and take your exam, you write down all the formulas that you can recall. And the first formula that you should write down on that separate sheet of paper or dry erase board is the ABC formula. We'll get to that in just a moment. As we know, it's going to be very difficult to focus on those first 90 questions, and when you eventually get to the math portion of your exam and try to recall all of those formulas to apply them, it could be very difficult. So once again, write down all the formulas that you can recall as soon as you sit down and take your tests. And the first formula that you should write down is the ABC formula, which we'll get to in just a moment. Another interesting tip when you're taking your exams is usually the last sentence of these math questions typically reveals the formula that is to be applied to that particular question. As an example for this question, what is the sales associate's commission if the associate sells the motel for the listed sale price? So immediately we know to apply the sales commission formula to solve this question. Okay, so let's jump right into it and talk about some simple conversions that you need to know to solve these questions you encounter, such as converting percentages to decimals, percentages to fractions, and fractions to decimals. If this is easy for you, then you can just sit back and relax. But if it's been a while since we've been in school, you might want to pay attention to make sure we're all on the same page. As an example of the first conversion that we're going to work on together, if I were to ask you to convert, let's say 20% into a fraction, how would you accomplish that? If you remember from school, you take the number, in this case 20, and you place it over 100. Some of us might remember this. Now, if the goal was to convert it into a fraction, we've completed that task, but we know that our answer is not going to be displayed in this form. We have to display it in its simplest form. So how do we accomplish that? Well, we have to find the greatest common factor, not denominator, because we are simplifying. We're not adding or subtracting fractions to one another. In other words, what is the biggest number that we can find that can be evenly divided into the numerator, the top number of the fraction, as well as evenly divided into the denominator, the bottom number of the fraction? And the largest number is 20. Now you can say that 10, 5, 2 are evenly divisible, but you have to find the greatest so that way you don't have to simplify further. 20 can go into 20 evenly one time and evenly into 100 5 times. So it is 1/5. It's in its simplest form. We completed the goal. If we were to convert this now from fraction into decimal, which you definitely want to do when you're solving these problems, you don't want to work with fractions, it just makes things a little bit more difficult. All you have to do is take the numerator and divide it by the denominator. So how would you do that? Well, if you look right here, you take 1 and simply divide it by 5. And when you do the math, you'll find out that it's 0.2. That looks familiar. But now, if the task is to convert from decimal back into a percentage, there's one of two ways you can do this. Either you can multiply by 100. Some of us remember this. And when you do so, you get 20. We can add the percentage symbol. It becomes 20% once again. Or you can move the decimal 2 spaces to the right. Let's see how that works. We move it 1 space, and then the second space, well, wait a second. There's something missing in the second space. But if you remember from school, if you're missing something, your teacher said, add a 0, and it becomes 20% once again. If I were to ask you to convert from percentage back into decimal, how would you do that? Well, you would take the 20% and you'd simply reverse the math. You'd divide by 100 since we multiplied to convert from decimal into percentage. And it would look like this. Or you can take the decimal point and move it 2 spaces in the opposite direction. But we don't see a decimal point. If you remember from school, if you don't see one, there's an invisible decimal that exists to the right of the number, and we move it just like Beyonce says. Where do we move it? To the left, to the left. And it brings us right here back to 0.2. Once again, you can remove the 0 and the percentage symbol. So it's full circle. Percentage to fraction, fraction to decimal, decimal back to a percentage. Should be seamless. But what I really wanted to get to was the ABC formula. Once again, this is going to be the basis for most of the problems, formulas that you have to remember to apply for these various math questions you encounter on your class and your state exam. It's similar to the Pythagorean theorem, a squared times b squared equals c squared. If you know at least 2 of those variables, you can calculate the missing variable every single time without fail. As an example, if I said a is 13 times b, which is going to be our missing variable, equals c, let's just say is 169, how would you solve for our missing variable? We know at least the other 2, so we can always solve for the missing. In this case, b, the first step, keyword starts with the I, we're going to isolate it, which means we have to get rid of everything else on this side of the equation. Your teacher said in order to get rid of it on one side of the equation, you divide it by the same number. But whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. All you have to do is remember this key phrase. You simply slide and divide. It works every single time, guys. So you take that 13, bring it under, and we divide. Just as a note, remember the equal symbol separates the equation from the left side to the right side. B, which we're trying to solve for, is located on the left side of the equation. We're trying to isolate it. So we must get rid of everything else, in this case, the 13. How do you get rid of it? Slide and divide to the other side of the equation. And now we're left with b equals 169 divided by 13. And if you do this math properly, take 169 divided by 13, and you'll find out it's not a mistake, it's not a glitch. You get 13, and this would be the correct answer. So you plug that in. If you want to check to see if this is correct because you feel unsure, all you have to do is substitute. Since b equals 13, substitute that back in the original equation, and you can simply multiply across. But I can assure you that 13 times 13 is 169. The square root of 169 is 13. 13 squared, 13 to the second power is 169. You might be thinking, okay, this is all great. A times b equals c. I get how it works, but how do I organize the ABC formula? What do I plug into the a, the b, and the c so I can solve accordingly? Well, you might want to pay attention, and of course, you want to write this down. You're going to be provided these handouts, but you should still be familiar with this information. A is always going to represent the total of something, times B, which is always going to represent the rate of something, equals C, which is going to represent your result or part of something. Congratulations. Once you understand this formula, your life is going to be that much easier when taking your exams. As you progress in this course, you will notice that most of the formulas that you're going to encounter are going to be structured in this format. Thank you for joining Cameron Academy, and we look forward to your success in the future in passing your exams. And if you have any questions or issues along the way, we're here to help you out. Visit CameronAcademy.com for additional study resources.